A German pocket battleship had found 38 helpless cargo ships in the middle of the Atlantic, 11-inch guns, heavy armor. Nowhere for the convoy to run. The slaughter should have taken less than an hour. Instead, 28 of those ships escaped, and the reason was one of the strangest misreadings in naval history. It was the 5th of November, 1940. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon. Convoy HX-84 pushed east at 9 knots, carrying steel, grain, oil, timber, everything Britain needed to survive the coming winter. 38 merchant ships moved in neat columns across the dark water. And they had only one escort. Just one. HMS Jervis Bay. A 20-year-old passenger liner converted into an armed merchant cruiser. 6 aging guns bolted to her decks. No armor. A crew of volunteers, reservists, and men considered too old for frontline warships. Her captain was Edward Fagan, a quiet Irish officer who had spent much of his career behind a desk. Fagan knew exactly what his ship was. A bluff. A real battleship could tear her apart in minutes. But the Atlantic was vast, and the Germans were supposed to be far away. That was the theory. 500 miles to the northwest, aboard the Admiral Scheer, Captain Theodore Cranky lowered his binoculars and smiled. His lookouts had spotted smoke on the horizon. A lot of smoke. Far too much for a single ship. Cranky had been hunting for 16 days without a single kill. His orders were simple. Break into the Atlantic, find a convoy, destroy it, get out before the Royal Navy could close the trap. He had the perfect weapon for the job. 6 11-inch guns in 2 armored turrets. 8 secondary guns, a top speed of 26 knots. On paper, Admiral Scheer could outshoot anything she could catch and outrun anything she could not. And now, at last, he had found them. A lookout called from the bridge. Smoke bearing 070. Multiple ships. Many ships. Cranky answered immediately. Full ahead. Close the range. The Scheer surged forward. On her bridge, officers were already sketching convoy formations, counting funnels, and calculating firing arcs. This was the kill they had been waiting for. An entire convoy with no visible escort. A perfect hunt. At 16:45, a lookout aboard one of the British ships spotted a gray silhouette forming through the haze. A warship shape. Fast. Low. Closing quickly. On the Jervis Bay, Captain Fagan stepped onto the bridge with a cup of tea still in his hand. He raised his glasses to his eyes, then froze. What he was seeing should not have been there. Not here. Not now. The shape was all wrong for a merchant ship. Too long. Too low in the water. 2 tall tower masts rising above the hull, and beneath them, the unmistakable outline of heavy gun turrets. A pocket battleship. Fagan quietly set the tea aside. Then he gave the order that changed everything. Signal the Commodore. Scatter at once. In the radio room, the warning was sent out in urgent bursts. Every ship turn away. Every ship make smoke. Every ship run for the coming darkness. Then Fagan gave a second order, one that stunned the men around him. Hard to starboard. All ahead full. The helmsman hesitated for a moment, hardly believing what he had heard. Fagan did not repeat himself. Turn toward the enemy. Toward her. The Jervis Bay began to swing around, not away from danger, but straight into it. Her blunt bow turned directly toward a warship that could destroy her with a single salvo. On the Admiral Scheer, Cranky was still counting targets. The range was falling fast. He intended to open fire as soon as they closed the distance. Then one of his officers noticed something strange. One of the merchant ships was turning. Cranky barely looked up. They would all turn eventually. Which one? The large one in the center of the convoy. Still, Crank was calm. He assumed it was trying to flee. Then the officer corrected him. The ship was not turning away. It was turning toward them, and it was accelerating. Cranky lowered his binoculars and looked again for himself. The vessel at the center of the convoy was now pointed directly at his bow. Black smoke pouring from her funnels as she built speed. Merchant ships did not do that. Merchant ships ran. Merchant ships showed their stern and prayed. For several seconds, Cranky said nothing. At last, one officer spoke softly. "It must be an auxiliary cruiser." Cronke asked the obvious question. "Then where are the rest of her escorts?" No one answered, because there were no others, and Cronke did not yet believe it. Cronke had been at sea for 16 days. He had studied every known British convoy escort in the Atlantic. A convoy this large should have had 2 cruisers, several destroyers, perhaps even a small carrier. It could not possibly be guarded by a single armed liner. That was absurd, which meant the real escorts had to be nearby, hidden in the haze, waiting for him to commit. Cranky snapped new orders across the bridge. Search every horizon, every quadrant. He wanted every mast identified before the battle began. On the Jervis Bay, Fagan's 6 old guns were already lifting toward the target. Their maximum range was 11,000 meters. The Scheer was still 17,000 away, far beyond reach. Fagan turned to his helmsman. He needed 5 minutes, just 5 minutes for the convoy to scatter. Keep the bow pointed at the enemy. Do not let them see the broadside. Do not let them guess what this ship really was. At 16:52, Admiral Scheer fired her first salvo. 6 11-inch shells blasted from the turrets at tremendous speed. Not at the convoy, at Jervis Bay. The shells missed. They crashed into the sea 100 meters astern, throwing towers of white water into the air. Cronke was still cautious. He was firing from long range while his lookouts searched for the cruisers he was certain must be nearby. He believed Jervis Bay was bait, a decoy trying to draw him into hidden guns. Fagan saw the splashes and understood at once. The German captain was afraid of them. "Hold this course," he ordered. Shell after shell came down. Jervis Bay's guns could not reach the enemy. Her 6-inch rounds were falling 6,000 meters short, but every minute she remained between the Scheer and the convoy was another minute for the merchant ships to vanish into the dusk. On the Scheer, frustration was beginning to grow. Cronke ordered the range closed. They were wasting shells at this distance. The great raider surged ahead. The gap narrowed fast. Now the 11-inch shells began to hit. The first shell smashed through Jervis Bay near the stern and exploded inside the ship. Steel buckled. Steam screamed from a ruptured line. A young stoker was killed before he even knew the shell had landed. The second shell struck the bridge. Captain Fagan was hurled across the chart table. When he forced himself back up, his left arm was gone below the elbow. A jagged splinter had torn open his chest. He barely seemed to notice. His first question was not about himself. He demanded to know whether the starboard gun was still firing. An officer stared at the wound and tried to warn him, but Fagan cut him off. He wanted to know about the gun, nothing else. The starboard gun was still firing. So was the forward gun. So was the aft gun. Jervis Bay was burning from bow to stern, and she was still shooting back. On the Scheer, Cronke was now certain something was wrong. He demanded another report on the horizon. The answer came back the same as before. Empty. No other ships. Cronke refused to accept it. That was impossible. The officer answered quietly. He had checked 3 times. Cronke raised his binoculars again and looked back at the burning shape of Jervis Bay. For the first time, he understood what he was really seeing. Not a decoy, not bait for a trap, a single-armed passenger liner, 20 years old, charging an 11-inch battleship alone because there was nothing else left to stand in the way. And behind her, the convoy was gone. Not destroyed. Disappearing. 38 plumes of smoke were spreading across the ocean in every direction. North, south, east. Ships running into rain squalls. Ships racing for darkness. Ships breaking formation and crossing each other's paths to confuse his gunners. Cronke had spent so long hunting phantom cruisers that he had almost forgotten the real prize. He ordered the helm forward through the liner. Straight through her. The Scheer swept past Jervis Bay at less than 5,000 meters. Her secondary guns finally opened fire. At that distance, the battleship could no longer miss. Shell after shell crashed into the converted liner. Then the forward magazine exploded in a blinding white flash, visible from every merchant ship still fleeing on the horizon. At 17:20, Jervis Bay's stern lifted clear of the water and she slipped beneath the sea. She had lasted 24 minutes. In those 24 minutes, the convoy had done something a convoy should never be able to do after being found in clear weather by a pocket battleship. It had vanished. Now Cranky faced a new problem. The sun was sinking fast. Rain squalls were thickening. Somewhere to the east were 38 merchant ships, and he no longer knew where any of them were. He turned toward the nearest smoke plume. The first ship he caught was the Maidan, loaded with steel. 2 salvos, and she was gone with all hands. The second was the Trewillard, gone. The third was the Kenbane Head, gone. The fourth was the Beaverford, a Canadian freighter whose captain made the same decision Fagan had made. He turned toward the Scheer and fired his tiny 4-inch gun at a battleship. Kronk spent another 20 minutes destroying her. Another 20 minutes. More ships slipping deeper into the dark. By the time Scheer found and sank the 5th ship, Fresno City, night had fully arrived. The sea was empty. Rain closed around the horizon. Radio signals warned that British warships were racing toward the area. Kronka had stayed too long. He turned south and disappeared into the weather. He had sunk 5 ships. He had been expected to sink 38. Later, at German naval headquarters, the after-action report was read in silence. One old passenger liner with 6 obsolete guns had delayed the most powerful surface raider in the Atlantic for 24 minutes. And in those 24 minutes, along with the confusion that followed, 32 merchant ships escaped. More than 200,000 tons of cargo reached British ports. Steel that would become tanks, grain that would feed cities, oil that would fuel bombers over Berlin. Kronka had not been outgunned. He had been outthought. He could not accept what his own eyes were showing him. A single converted liner charging a battleship did not fit any training manual, any doctrine, or any rational idea of naval warfare. So he assumed there had to be an unseen enemy somewhere beyond the smoke, and while he hunted an enemy that did not exist, the real prize slipped away into the night. Edward Fagan was awarded the Victoria Cross after his death. His ship was gone. Many of his crew were dead. Survivors were pulled from the freezing Atlantic by the Swedish freighter Stureholm, whose captain Sven Olander turned back alone into the darkness while the battleship was still hunting because he refused to leave them behind. But perhaps the strangest detail came from German records themselves. During the opening moments of the battle, Kronke's own first officer had urged him to ignore Jervis Bay completely. Fire past her, go straight for the cargo ships, destroy the convoy in half an hour, and leave. Kronka overruled him. Too risky, too many unknowns. Had he listened, Scheer might have sunk 20 ships, perhaps 30, before nightfall. The Battle of the Atlantic could have looked very different. Britain's winter of 1940 might have become a winter of famine. Instead, a 20-year-old liner with museum guns and a captain who calmly set down his tea and ordered his ship toward the enemy changed the arithmetic of an ocean. Not because she won. She did not win. She was annihilated. She won because the enemy could not believe what she was doing quickly enough to stop her. That is the quiet and uncomfortable lesson of Jervis Bay. Sometimes the side with every advantage loses, not because the other side is stronger, but because the other side does something the stronger side cannot fit into its own mind. Theodore Kronk survived the war. Years later, when asked about that evening off the Grand Banks, he gave only one answer. He had expected a fleet. Instead, he was attacked by a ghost.